What if Quantum Leap were a murder mystery series? Well, you'd have something like The Seven Lives of Lea, a new French Netflix series where a girl works to solve a mystery through some very unconventional means. After finding a young man's remains, Leah wakes up in the 90s and body swaps 7 times as she tries to solve the mystery of his death and then prevent it. This is 7 episodes, which is fitting for the show, and they're each about 45-ish minutes long. Now, this does have a certain feel of Quantum Leap to it, where Leah, our main character, discovers the remains of someone and then wakes up the next morning in the past, in that person's body. I love the discombobulating effect that this has on the character, but then this happens 6 more times throughout the show. And each of the characters does a really good job at portraying a teenager who's inhabiting their body and trying to figure out what's going on and how to act. Now, this did take me a little bit to understand the rules of how things happen because the series doesn't just spell it all out for us right up front. If when Leah is in someone else's body and she makes certain decisions, do they affect her present 30 years later? And do the people that she inhabits remember her actions? Now, the story does give us the answers and then holds to the rules that it sets up, which I appreciate. And the story is set up so Leah goes back in time to the same date as is in her present, which happens to be 7 days before Ishmael, the guy whose remains she finds, dies. So say if she goes back on June 18th of her time, she wakes up on June 18th, but just 30 years earlier. So this provides an easy timeline to follow, but also creates an urgency to figure out what happened because by the end of the week, Ishmael's dead. Now, I love the tension that this ticking clock creates. And because it's not like Leah can control when she arrives during the day in the past, she may wake up in the morning or maybe even the afternoon, which then reduces the amount of time that she has to work to solve the mystery. She inhabits 7 different people, which rounds out the narrative well. And we see the central story from a variety of different perspectives. And it's fun to watch how her actions in one person appear to another. I mean, sometimes this causes some light chuckles, but for the most part, it never really loses its edge of tension. I think the mystery is pretty well crafted here. I mean, there are many times throughout when I thought actions and the behaviors were pointing in one direction, only to find out later that I was completely wrong. The show isn't nearly as obvious in the reveals as I thought it was going to be. Now, while I don't think I'd consider it misdirection, we just follow the clues as Leah discovers them, and I found myself trying to solve the mystery, but I was failing. I mean, even right up until the end, when I thought I had figured it out, a new complication arose that was unexpected. The character relationships can feel a bit angsty sometimes, but they also come across fairly realistic. I mean, maybe if just slightly exaggerated. The drama of high school, especially for the final year where kids are just trying to figure out who they are, plan for the future, appease their parents while still trying to maintain some semblance of their own desires, I think it's captured effectively. I found myself being able to relate in different ways to the characters. There wasn't any one particular player that I identified with completely, but I could connect in small ways with almost all of them, or at least be able to sympathize with them and then understand their motivations. I do think there is a bit of fluff and filler at times within the show, and sometimes being a bit indulgent in an area that is great for establishing a scene, but doesn't really need the amount of time or focus that it ends up getting. This didn't happen a ton of times, so while it could become bothersome, these scenes didn't add too much unnecessary time overall. I think by trimming, it would just have progressed the story along just a little bit faster. But I didn't want it to progress too fast because the drama and the mystery were very engaging, and I wanted to sit in the world for as long as it took for me to try and figure out the clues. I enjoyed the cinematography too. I mean, not only are the locations beautiful, the way of some of the scenes are captured helped to increase the confusion or maybe anguish that Leah is feeling. Now, the show did use Dutch angles, but it used them sparingly so they were effective and not distracting. I also really enjoyed the music. I mean, some of the music was familiar from the early 90s, but then there's a bunch that I didn't know, but I was really getting into it. I mean, some had an indie rock vibe that complemented the entire production. There's an existential question that becomes raised the further that the show goes along, which creates some intriguing emotion and then dramatic tension. Now, all along the way, I became invested in the characters more and more, so the impending consequences of actions all had the potential to be happy and sad simultaneously. I mean, it's a very somber tone, but ultimately still very satisfying. So overall, The 7 Lives of Lea is an engaging drama with a great amount of mystery inherent to the story. While I enjoyed the narrative, I was especially drawn to the performances, as each actor not only played their character, but then at one point or another had to play a teenage girl inhabiting their character. They did this convincingly without feeling tropey or unnatural. And the urgency of the story helps to build good anxiety, made all the more effective because of characters and dialogue that made me connect with them. And although there are some scenes that overstay their welcome on a certain aspect, Overall, the pacing of the show is efficient and driving, maintaining the right balance between tension and drama that kept me engaged the entire time. There's sex, nudity, a ton of profanity, and some violence. I give The 7 Lives of Lea 4.5 out of 5 couches. So what's a good mystery you've seen recently? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.